This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 249 of the GardenDC podcast. What if you could grow in a space full of sun, with a deer fence, and surrounded by other great gardeners? In this episode of GardenDC, we talk with Michelle Nelson, Montgomery Park's Community Garden Program Manager, all about community gardens. The plant profile is an update on our previous one on lavender, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on corn in small spaces by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Michelle Nelson. She is the Community Garden Program Manager with Montgomery Parks in Montgomery County, Maryland. Welcome, Michelle.
So glad to be here.
So, Michelle, we like to ask our guests here on the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
That's a great question. I like to say yes for me. I've always been just an outside kid climbing trees since I can remember. My dad always tells a story about calling out in the neighborhood and wondering where I am, and then he looks up in the tree and sees me up there. I think, I've always had some element of having a green thumb or being connected to plants in some way my entire life.
And readers of Washington Gardener magazine may recall that we profiled Michelle in our September 2024 issue. But for those who didn't read that, let's talk a little bit about you and your background. So, did you grow up in the Washington, D.C. area?
Yes, I did. I like to call myself a D-list, a DMV celebrity, just because when I moved back here after my undergraduate studies, it just seemed that I was working for a local agency. I became this hometown hero, being featured on different, radio shows and things, and I just never really saw that for myself. So I grew up in a very small corner of Montgomery County in Burtonsville. Burtonsville is currently getting more attention than it did when I grew up there. But I was born and raised there, spent a lot of time in the rec center and a lot of time with my mom in our little backyard garden. She also started a garden at our church. And then when I went off to school, I studied earth and environmental science. I went to an 1890 land grant institution, North Carolina A&T, and when I was there, just all my classes were on the university research farm. And I already loved plants and I already loved science, but adding in the agriculture and horticulture component just really solidified why I was supposed to be in this work. And a lot of internships. A few summers I would come back up here. I worked for the U.S. Botanic Garden on their garden and grounds team. So I just had this well-rounded garden experience and garden exposure from backyard gardening to professional landscaping gardening. So now being in this space, it just feels really nice.
Yeah, and I know you enjoy gardening at home as well. And for those listeners outside the DC region, maybe we should describe a little bit of the growing conditions and climate around here.
So I feel bad, but you probably know this because I know the zones were just recently updated.
Mm-hmm.
But I live in Gaithersburg, which is, I think it may either be the same zone or slightly different. So a lot of my growing is currently in containers on my patio in my condo. And then I get to have the experience of gardening and volunteering in a lot of other capacities across the county. But our weather here is very humid. It's hot. Our growing season for most people is about late May up until November, and you can grow almost anything. It's not tropical like Florida, but you can get a lot in your garden, whether it's a patio garden or whether it is a in-ground garden.
And yep, smack in the heart of Zone 7. And Gaithersburg is pretty much due north of Washington, D.C. So it was a bedroom suburb, but it's gotten built up over the years. So some businesses and corporations are now headquartered there as well.
Yes, Gaithersburg is busy. It is
Mm-hmm.
busy. Way busier than Burtonsville. Growing up in this region, the tale of two counties was something I heard a lot about. And I lived in a lot of different parts of the county. So growing up in Burtonsville, then living in Tacoma Park for a little bit, and now being quote unquote up county, there's just so many different parts in this region and also in this county, just culturally and just people wise, it's a little different. But yeah, I love this area, and there's so much to do when you are looking at gardening or when you're looking at trying to feed your family.
Mm-hmm. For those who are familiar with Montgomery County and our politics and issues, there's the east-west divide in Montgomery County that some people argue about, and then there's the down county and up county
Hmm.
issues. And we all say that the others have it better than us. Everybody says, oh, you got the new library. Oh, you got the new pool or the new aquatic center. And there's always, the grass is always greener is going on all over Montgomery County.
It's so true. It's so true. Which living in all the areas, I feel like you invest in those resources and you experience those resources if you seek them out. And I encourage hyper local people to know that really people are trying their best to serve you.
Mm-hmm. And everything is open to all county residents. Maybe not as accessible as everything is, but yeah. So that brings us to our Montgomery County Community Gardens program. And so we have community gardens scattered across the county. And maybe I'll have you, Michelle, describe some of those community gardens.
Sure. So, yeah, the Montgomery Parks Community Garden Program is a, I won't say large, but we are a growing program in this region. So we have 14 different community gardens across the county. We have a cluster of community gardens in downtown Silver Spring. Then we have a cluster of community gardens in Rockville. And then we have a few kind of outliers. We have one garden in Bethesda, and then one garden in the Briggs Cheney kind of Cloverly area. And then we have a cluster of a couple of gardens in Germantown and Boyd's. So we try to be across the map. There are a couple local jurisdictions that also have community garden programs. So the city of Rockville has a pretty robust community garden program, and they serve Rockville residents. And then the city of Gaithersburg also has a community garden as well. But our program, we have been in existence, I guess, since 2009, 2010, and we're just constantly trying to grow. Hopefully, we have a goal of 18 gardens by 2028, and we are chipping away at that slowly. So right now we have 14. Hopefully in the next 2 years it'll be 16, and then we just keep going, and then we'll have two more somewhere that will poof magically and fall into my lap, I hope. But yeah, we are constantly trying to expand our program and create accessible options for gardeners or for people who just want to grow their own food, whether that is through education, whether that is through food donations and harvest parties. And we try to serve the folks that are on our wait list, but also just want to know more about gardening. So we try to cover all our bases, but it is a large county and it is hard to do. But our program is really amazing. I'm very proud to be the manager of the program.
Wonderful. So for those who are not familiar with community gardens, we're going to go into definition of that and some of the challenges and benefits of community gardening. And of course, compare Montgomery County's community garden program with those of maybe some of the neighboring jurisdictions and elsewhere. Michelle, that brings us to, what is a community garden?
So, my definition of a community garden is a space, a large parcel of land that has been divided up into individual smaller parcels that are rented out to public residents or those who are very interested in gardening for local food production. In addition to that, our program really does not focus on revenue generation for community gardeners. So we are not like a market gardener program. We really are a program that provides parkland to residents to grow their own food. And the model of community, or the name community garden, sometimes can be misleading, I think, because a lot of people think that it's more communal gardening. So it's open to everybody. The parcels shouldn't exist because they're barriers, or the parcels shouldn't exist because it is elitist or things of that nature. But in my experience, it has really created community for people that you wouldn't typically see or maybe even speak to, you will in a community garden. So they are spaces for local food production, there are spaces for community building, there are spaces for talking to someone that you wouldn't typically talk to. There are spaces for evening the playing field. There are spaces for sharing a new vegetable or a new fruit. I love community gardens. And I will probably die on a hill believing in community gardens and what they do. But in short, they are a parcel of land divided into individual parcels for people to participate in local food production.
Yeah, and I agree with all you said about community building and how great community gardens have that as part of their mission. And when I visit community gardens in other cities and states across the US, I'm always interested in how they set up their programs, how they do things differently than we do in our county, even in the surrounding jurisdictions. I've seen community gardens where you describe it more as like a market garden where everybody is working together growing the patch of tomatoes, the cucumbers, and then they share from the produce from that. So, but most community gardens are like you describe in the European system of allotment gardening, where you each have your own little parcel and that's your garden for at least the year or however long you're renting it.
Exactly. So our program, we allow people to garden for the entire year, and you're absolutely right. I always find myself, whether it is stumbling upon a community garden while I'm traveling or just seeking them out to find more information about what they call a community garden, and it varies so much across the nation and globally. I think too it can vary, but the individual parcels is really, I think, the fabric of when people want to create a community garden. They're wanting to create a space where multiple families, multiple people can participate in the fun.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the purpose of a community garden is to provide that growing space for, say, somebody who lives in an apartment or condo or just doesn't have access to enough sunshine to grow vegetables well. So they would be looking for that. There's also that yearning for community. So even if they had enough space at home, they're still looking to join a community garden because they want to do it alongside other gardeners.
That definitely hits on the community piece. Having a garden buddy or a neighbor, that's, I'm sure, why we have such a high retention rate. Just knowing that someone's always looking out for you in the garden. And for some of our gardens, most of our gardens, the people also live in the neighborhood or in that exact community. So having that space and knowing that there are other people that share common interests and will do things for you.
Yeah, I think on our community garden, I'm at the Fenton Community Garden under Montgomery Park System. We have a Google group, and when somebody goes on vacation and needs their plot watered or something happens, maybe they broke their foot and need a little assistance weeding, they'll post to that, and then somebody else will jump in and say, I can take care of that for you.
It's very communal. Funny story. We had someone who was at another community garden, and their words, not ours, they called the community garden actually a prison because of some of the infrastructure and things that we provide. So my response was probably sharp, but my response, I was very interested in why they felt that way and what they thought, because like you said, on that listserv, there's constantly people offering guidance and assistance and educational resources. And it is a community where you can jump in wherever you feel comfortable. There's really no pressure to go above and beyond, but most people do, and most people just want that reciprocated, and they know that it will be reciprocated in these spaces.
And there's so many opportunities to learn from each other, even just walking around our community garden. And I look at what other people are growing, what's doing well for them, their technique for trellising, maybe I can pick up tips from that. So, just by osmosis, really, gardening side by side with other gardeners, you learn so much.
You do. I have learned so much. When I first entered into this space, I guess maybe it was almost 10 years ago, I had grown in, North Carolina. I grew in Maryland. I've grown in a lot of different places in the nation. But when I came here, I was working with a refugee garden, or a garden that served refugee families. And I learned so much about bitter melon, and so much about mustard greens, and so much about things that I thought I knew, but I didn't. And they were just pointing out little tricks and tips and reusing things that I wouldn't use, but then when you see it in the garden, it then becomes a work of art. So it helps literally keep me grounded and helps me realize that we're all trying to share things, we're all trying to learn things, and then pass it on to the next person so that they can do better or try it out if it fits their interest.
And one of the ways we do that at our community garden is we have a shared bulletin board, and I'll leave extra seed packs there. Or if somebody raises one too many tomato seedlings, as happens, people will leave their extra tomato seedlings at our picnic table in the middle, and they'll post it to the listserv and say, hey, I left some brandywine seedlings or such and such seedlings. Please help yourself. And that brings us to some of the common rules and practices of community gardens.
So I'm very proud of our conditions of use. That's what they are called. Our garden Bible, what we use to enforce the rules and regulations. And I'm finding out that a lot of people also, a lot of other gardens, I should say, maybe people use them too, I don't know, but they refer to those conditions of use, and they have gone through many different iterations over the years, but they really help us communicate to gardeners what our expectations are, what the rules are, what does a warning mean, what does a check-in mean, what does a violation mean, what is permitted on parkland and what is not permitted on parkland, when things should be planted and when things should be put to bed. So our conditions of use, like I said, the garden season basically starts in for April 1 for us. So we are going out and doing inspections around that time, and gardeners should have at least 20% of something happening in their garden plot. That could be mulching, that could be adding compost, that could be just digging up some of the soil or checking out their garlic if they planted garlic the previous season. That's kind of what happens in April. And then by June 1st, we expect for the plot to be 90 to 100% planted. And then um, I think November 15th, we expect for the garden to kind of be put to bed, unless you are overextending the season, and that's fine in our program. But the conditions of use really allow us to just lay down the law, but also clearly and concisely share what our expectations are, and how we can communicate with gardeners.
Hmm. And I think that's so important to have some expectations out there. And at the beginning of the season, we all go over the conditions of use and kind of sign off on it and have an understanding at a mandatory meeting of the gardeners. And I know other community gardens I visited, they will close out literally for the winter and plow the plots under. So you don't have perennial plants. You don't have garlic. You don't have a little fig tree in your plot, because they will literally just plow the whole field, remark the plots again, and restart every year anew. And that's, I think, one way to do it and one way to guarantee there's a clean start again. But I think there's a lot to be said for our system because you're able to build up the soil, you're able to have asparagus, crops overwintering, and even I have blackberry and other little shrubs.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people wonder how come people stay in our program for so long, and they really challenge it also, which we love to defend because some people don't know or don't understand that when you are doing any type of planting or growing, you need to establish really great soil structure. You need to establish whether you're going to
Hello.
have perennial herbs or whether you're going to
No,
have
I'm just doing like a
um,
meeting right now.
anything that's going to have longevity or something that you love to eat that takes a long time. If we were to come in and take all of that stuff out, it would eliminate a lot of what people eat and a lot of what people enjoy. It would also change just ecologically what happens in our community gardens. Maybe we wouldn't have as many like hummingbirds coming to see each garden. Maybe we wouldn't have as many golden finches. Also the other issues, yes, that like pest issues, but at the same time having that foundation of the soil structure and putting in cover crops and having the ability to plant things where you can really see them over an extended period of time really sets our program apart.
Yeah, and even just like the simple things like letting an herb self-sow, like holy basil, which comes back every year for me, that wouldn't happen with the clear out and restart system. So
Right.
that's always great to have that option. GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Where's that presentation you need for your boss? Slack? Email? Drive? Lost, like your sanity, after wasting hours searching 76 tabs. Your work tools shouldn't take so much work. Dropbox Dash finds what you need fast across all your work apps, so you can focus on what matters. Spend less time searching, more time creating. Learn more at dropbox.com/dash.
We have a fence around the perimeter of the entire garden, and that's basically a deer fence. We have a little bit of deer pressure, knock on wood, not a ton, but being able to keep the deer out is one of the main reasons I think a lot of people do have a plot where we are, because the deer pressure in the home gardens is so intense that without a deer fence and other precautions, you're just not going to be able to have a food garden.
Once upon a time, I thought that the deer pressure was very low at Fenton Street, but but it's not. I have a very funny story. I think maybe the winter of 2019, I saw a post on the listserv, someone posted, it may have been you, Kathy, I don't know, but someone mentioned that there were deer actually inside of the deer fence at Fenton. And I remember panicking a little bit, and then getting in my car and driving to Fenton Street and, corralling the deer out of the Fenton Street Community Garden with it. It wasn't a lot of snow, but it was the winter and it was a little icy. But chasing, or I won't say chasing because I wasn't chasing, but corralling and slowly guiding 3 deer out of the Fenton Street Community Garden is probably one of my more memorable stories in the program. It just, one of the deer was really scared in one of the upper corners of the park and just shot through the deer fence. This was before we upgraded to chain link, but it just shot straight through the deer fence and obviously got caught inside of the garden. But I had to like open up the large maintenance gate and just go inside, talk to the one deer that was just laying down. I mean, they were comfortable in the garden, and this was winter. They were just comfortable, just hanging out. Just, I'm not going to move because this feels really comfortable and nice to me. And I said, I love this garden as much as you, but you have to move along. You have to go. So I eventually did get them out of the large gate, but it was I wasn't expecting to see that in winter and then at Fenton Street. I would have expected that at like Park Lawn, which is right in the heart of Rock Creek, or I would have expected it at like one of our sites in Germantown/Boyds, which really borders the South Recreation and South Germantown Recreational Park and Seneca Creek State Park up there. So their deer pressure is a lot more than Fenton, but I just think things in this job, I never thought that I would have stories of chasing deer out of a community garden.
Well, I'm glad you were able to escort them out. Thank you from all us gardeners there. So we do have a bunny issue. Our first few years in the garden, we didn't, and now we have rampant rabbits, and they're so adorable, but many of us do fence off portions of our individual plots, and some people do a chicken wire or hardware cloth around the entire plot just to keep the rabbits and other rodents out.
Yeah, we encourage gardeners to add a smaller enclosure in their community garden plot. If it's something that's a little bit more crazy, like groundhogs, we do, thankfully, at parks have a wildlife ecology team that will assist us with trapping or relocating different pests. But rabbits, I think, have become a bigger issue in the last couple years. I'm not sure. Well, in downtown Silver Spring, I think it is because there's been just consistent construction happening with the Purple Line and with many other just development projects that just nature is often displaced, and where do I go, and what this used to be X, Y, and Z, and now it's something else. That happens to us as humans too. Like our memory remembers that this used to be something different, and we go there thinking, oh, I can find solace here, and then you can't. So I think that's what's been happening specifically at Fenton. But we are constantly trying to deter certain rabbits and rats and other things that just come up into the garden. It is a constant battle.
Yeah, I think as you said, the construction is driving more rodents like rats into the community gardens. And of course, we have to keep any fruit or vegetables from falling off the ground, try to keep it as clean as possible. But no matter what you do, if there's humans, there's going to be this type of rat population somewhere around.
Yes, this year's orientation, just hearing from gardeners their frustrations around the rat population and what's happening in that specific community was really disheartening. And like, as a public servant, I try to be understanding and share tips and information and constantly research like what information can we share with them. But it's a hard answer or hard question to answer, what do we do about the rats? It's like, this is a bigger public health question than just put up a fence or don't plant this or don't plant that. It's a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a struggle for a lot of urban gardeners, and finding that hardware cloth is my best friend. Lining either the outside of a bed with the hardware cloth or even putting it down in the ground so that they're not burrowing and coming up is helping a little bit.
We have strongly encouraged gardeners to upgrade from chicken wire to hardware cloth,
Mm-hmm.
just because the gauge is so much smaller. And even for some of our sites, when we would upgrade the fence, we would also put in either hardware cloth at the bottom or in certain areas to try and create another barrier for any type of pest to enter in. Except for humans, though, because humans can get crafty and they can climb. But we do try to advise gardeners and the public about just tips and tricks and upgrading and reinforcing some of the things that you maybe have done in the past. You just got to change things up sometimes.
And that does bring up the problem of theft at community gardens. So we don't have a huge problem at ours, and we do hear reports of crimes and thefts at other community gardens. And some I've been to that even have a good fencing and locking system. You're never going to stop somebody who's hungry or who needs food from coming in, or just crime of opportunity. You see that really good looking watermelon through the fence and you want it, so it might get stolen, or it can also be due to just sheer vandalism. I've seen that also happen at community gardens.
Yeah, I think that there is something to be said. Maybe this goes back to the model that you choose, but for us, it is still disheartening for when gardeners come to us and say that their garlic was stolen or their watermelon was gone. It's even more disheartening when it's a larger garden and you suspect that maybe it's neighbors taking from neighbors. But I think the model of individual plots, sometimes this is where I do believe it can be challenged a little bit. If there were a space where people were growing something where it could be open to anyone for taking it home or eating, or growing things outside of the fence, or us donating extra produce back, that could offset some of that. In Baltimore City, I remember my first experience with a community garden that didn't have a fence. There was no fence. Of course, they have very different deer pressure than we do, but it was so cool to walk up to a community garden as just someone who was driving through the city and be able to harvest a sprig of rosemary. I don't know, something about that just felt very freeing and liberating. And they still had individual plots, but I think that expectation early on was kind of set. Hey, this is open. Anybody can come here and harvest whatever they want, and that ideal of theft kind of is removed off of the table. But reframing and reshaping that for people who pay for a permit fee in our program, like, we have to advocate for them and encourage them to set up different protections. Like, we will set up game cameras if we have to try and figure out what's going on. And it's kind of our responsibility to figure out, well, why are these thefts happening? Or is this because people are hungry? Or is it because there's increased foot traffic and people are just curious but see that there's a lock and immediately think that that means that they can't come in? So there's a lot that comes with the lock and key method, but there are so many different models also coming online, I think, in this region, where people really can benefit or be part of a community or explore a community garden where they don't see that gate or that lock kind of, oh, if I go in there, I'm going to steal something.
Yeah, I think it helps to have open garden days, which we host occasionally at our garden, and opening it up to the neighborhood to show them the individual plots, and that we have a monthly gleaning program for harvest share, and donating, aside from what individual plot owners might donate on their own already. So that's good to have that signage up and to tell people that it is privately owned, each plot, but we do have a way of donating for the hungry.
Yes, our reducing food waste and like food recovery priority really helps us to expand those offerings. That was something that we did, but it was not as formalized as it is now, like working with Harvest Share and having harvest parties and having like 50% of our entire program donate or have a grow to donate plot designated to them is an opportunity for us to say, yes, these are our community spaces, and yes, these are individual plots, but like you said, here is where we donate. You can go and get free produce on these days, or here, come inside and actually the door's open. So if you want to try something that you haven't tried, maybe a gardener will offer you something. So taking that approach and creating other opportunities for people to experience our program has really been big for us, especially after the pandemic.
So let's talk about some of those conditions of use that would not occur to a non-community gardener. And I think one of my favorite is the rule of nothing over 6 feet tall.
Yes, so the conditions of use, again, we learn something new every season. And I'm laughing because, again, there have been some very traumatic experiences for me as program manager and working with people and enforcing these guidelines. But then there have also been those moments where people are so happy that the rules exist and that we enforce them properly. So we do have a couple of rules that you just wouldn't automatically connect to gardening or to supporting your neighbor. So the height limits are one thing. We do have a structure request process, and technically people are not supposed to erect any buildings or structures on parkland. And so allowing us to have a height limit, a process where we can approve them, really actually gives the gardener more permission to expand what their permit allows them to do. So you can now, nothing can be over 6 feet, but people can experiment with different things, whether it's dwarf fruit trees or having a shrub that they kind of cut back. But really, we don't want people shading neighbors. We don't want to show up to the garden one day and see a newly erected water catchment system that we had no idea that you were planning on installing. And it's another way for us to communicate. I think also we really try to encourage people to stay within their kind of allotted space. It allows them to expand and experiment with their space. So we have a lot of different rules. We can definitely link those so that people can just see them or just share them, because the rules there get reviewed by our volunteer liaisons from year to year. So there is an actual gardener population that is reviewing these rules and saying, yes, that looks great. No, that's not going to go over well, before they go out to the general public. Within the conditions of use, we also were able to institute the harvest parties. Like after a certain date, okay, people are going on vacation, things are happening. We should be able to initiate a garden harvest if that is something that we want to do. So it really has supported a lot of the expansion of our program. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, people think rules confine them, but sometimes they just give them the parameters for what they can do beyond that.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have that height limit again, since where plots are so cheek by jowl, side by side, and if somebody erects something a little bit tall and full, you're going to be in full shade. And then the whole point of having the plot in the first place was the full sun access. So basically it's just keeping conditions the same and setting some boundaries. So same with our communal pathways. The community gardeners are tasked with covering them with wood chips that are delivered by the Park Service, that we just maintain weed-free pathways. Other community gardens I've seen have like wide grass pathways between the plots and between the rows, and somebody will come in and mow those. So it's just a grass system rather than a wood chip pathway, and keeping those down. Other community gardens, we should point out, Michelle, might just be a grow box or a salad table or a grow bed, like a raised bed, rather than an entire plot.
Yes. So within our program, we do have different typologies and styles. So some of the actual newer design gardens don't use wood chips as that material. And we have our traditional style is in-ground plots that are, they range from 200 to 625 square feet. But now we've really been experimenting with the veg trugs, which are a elevated raised garden table for people with disabilities or people who want to experience gardening with increased accessibility. That's one option. It's a smaller offering, but it still allows for, it's a great option for patio gardening. We also have to include an accessible gardening option for all of our new community gardens. And then we also are experimenting with raised beds or 32 square feet of growing space, whether that is a small plot with granite style edging or again an elevated raised bed that is 8x4. So we are trying to also stay with the trends of community gardens across the nation. There's so many ways to create a community garden and use different materials for the beds and for the spacing where you grow. And when I went to San Francisco, for example, most of their program, they are not giving gardeners like 200 square feet or 600 square feet. That's just unheard of. So they are looking at even smaller, like 50 square feet or even smaller than that. And so it really made me think, well, how do we institute that in some of our new community gardens? And how do we get maybe novice gardeners to just dip their toe into gardening and see if they like it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those raised bed community gardens where you might just have like a 4x4 box or a 3x6 box, and that's your plot, so to speak, and it has a number on it, and that's yours for the growing season. I've seen those a lot more in urban and small space areas, or as you say, anybody who needs assistance or a raised bed, that's a little bit more accessible for some gardeners. And that does bring up the wait list issue. So having a series of boxes in a small field, you can fit a lot more gardeners in that way. And we always talk about the pressure on the wait list, and many community gardens have long wait lists. And I've also spoken to some city community gardens that have no wait list. They're like, we want gardeners to come here. So I'm always trying to spread the word about those that have openings.
Yeah, you'll have to share that the list of that you have to share that list with me just so I can have a breath of fresh air to not see so many names on a wait list. It really breaks my heart sometimes when I see what our wait list looks like. It also excites me, and it knows that this wasn't just a quick trend. It is a long-lasting experience and something that people want to keep coming back to. So our wait list maybe is a little bit different in terms of by definition for some jurisdictions. So our wait list is actually year to year. It opens up on the first Monday of December of every single year. And we basically capture those who are interested with their name, their email, their zip code, and like their gardening experience. And then in January and February, we kind of assign those plots on a first come, first served basis. We, in the last 3 years, have done an analysis on our wait list, and this analysis is looking at who is on the list, why they're interested in growing, what their experience level is, and the zip codes in the county where we are getting the most interest and most pressure to start a new community garden. It's pressure, but it's also informing us where we really need to be strategic about what land use opportunities exist in those parts of the county. So, is there a master planning process coming up? Is there a new amendment coming up? Is just different things of that nature where maybe we can get in a community garden. So, we're also looking at site suitability constantly, just where can we put a new community garden, and where do flat, open, sunny, with access to water parcels exist, whether that is specifically we're looking at parkland, but if that is on private land or if that's on like a house of worship's land, what that could potentially look like, if there's a memorandum of understanding or a lease agreement. There's just a lot that goes into it, but we're working on our 2025 waitlist analysis right now, and it's kind of showing the same thing that it showed last year, that we still have a really big interest in Germantown, the Wheaton, Aspen Hill area. Silver Spring is still very popular on that list, and there's one other location that I'm forgetting right now, but those are places where we would call them a hot spot.
Yeah, and I was going to say the requirements of fairly flat, open, sunny, and accessible. That is a lot of pressure in the DC area, because if there's not already a soccer field there or something else, I'd be surprised. Whereas in some other cities, they have excess land, empty lots, or they're going in transition. So they could put a temporary community garden, maybe like 3 to 5 years in a space while that is being revitalized. But that's generally not the issue for the greater DC area.
Right. I think our program in its beginning stages was definitely considered more of a temporary use. Fenton Street is actually a good example. It's a community garden that was going to be there for this amount of time, and then maybe things fell through or initial plans changed. And also, there's very vocal and politically involved folks at Fenton Street. So I always tell folks at our agency, if you want to take that away, prepare for a fight. So our program is constantly really advocating, and in my position, I'm advocating internally and externally for more sites, for just where can we be creative, even if it is an urban park. Well, we now have smaller space requirements. So the square footage, for example, we're not looking for 10,000 square feet. We're looking for like 4,000 square feet. And we can go back to that designer typology of smaller beds with everything in complete squares, just making it work for the space that we are offered or allotted in this region, because space is a premium.
And for those looking to start a community garden program in their community, or say they're on private or church property and want to start their own community garden, where can they find resources for that?
So there are lots of resources out there. I really like to look at, you can always look up different master plans. I say this, hear me out. So Oregon, actually, I think it's the city of Cornwallis, has a master plan specifically for community gardens for their jurisdiction. And it has so much information in it just about how you construct a community garden, what you should look for, ways to apply for grants. Just there's so much information in that one resource. I know that also in DC DPR, they used to have a community garden guide, which was also very helpful. It talks specifically about the same things. You know, what do you have access to? What do you not have access to? How large do you want the plots to be? What's your end goal? What do you hope to envision? If you're on private land, you can always email me or email someone at your parks or planning agency and just inquire, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. What are the steps? And the advice that I always give people is to develop a proposal with all those questions answered. And then when you go to share it with those stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are a public agency or whether they are other nonprofits that you're trying to work with or a church or a mosque or whatever it is, once you have all that stuff kind of ironed out, then it's very hard for people to say no. So I would say looking at funding resources as well, whether it's grants or whether it is, again, partnerships. Partnerships are very important to me, but they're also very important in this world. It's in our region, specifically in the DMV, everybody within the food and gardening space knows literally someone. You all know the same people, and you know an expert who can help you with those things. But off the top of my head, those three resources would be just something for people to explore.
Mm-hmm. I also recommend the American Community Gardening Association, which is at communitygarden.org, and we'll put a link to that as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah, and I'll put the conditions of use for Montgomery County Parks Community Gardens. We'll link that in our episode show notes as well.
The American Community Gardening Association is a great resource. Thank you so much for saying that, because I just came back from their conference where they have an annual conference, and going to the conference is also just a way to soak up information. This conference was in New York City this year, and it was in partnership with the American Community Gardening Association, Green Thumb, New York NYC, and then Denver Urban Gardens. And so there's even finding out information about that conference. There were so many jurisdictions and so many amazing questions and just opportunities to network, hear about the different models, hear about where jurisdictions are in their process. So some jurisdictions are not trying to grow. Some are trying to grow. Some are more community oriented and community driven. So community members are making the decisions versus our agency where there are park staff that are making a lot of the decisions. So just that's a really great resource. And they actually have I think a book as well that walks you through, and they have an amazing newsletter too. So that's a great resource.
Yeah, I think their website has some great guidelines and also can walk you through some of those, what's our next step? And as you say, grants are available for gardens like this. So basically, once you get the land, the rest can fall into place.
Yeah, the land is the biggest piece, but there are other resources and opportunities. So for example, parks, a lot of our community gardens are on the higher end for applying for grants. So yes, we may apply for a grant, but we would need to match those funds most likely. But this year, I think it was the first round of funding. Maryland Department of Natural Resources actually has a green space equity grant, which if you do not have the land, you can apply through their program to acquire land. The grant awarded up to $300,000 for these efforts, and we were one of the awardees. So that one of those community gardens that I mentioned that's getting ready to open, or is in kind of design and talking phases, is at the Wheaton Regional Park. So there are grant opportunities that will also help you acquire the land too.
Well, I must say, in all my visits to other community gardens in other communities, Each one is so unique and has its own little personality just because of it draws from that local community. And I was just visiting one this week in Prince George's County near Sportsfield, and the predominant crop there was African spinach. And it was so interesting to see they have groundhog pressure and deer pressure. So their own little issues that we might not have, but also different access to water, different access to shared tools. So it's always interesting to compare and contrast the different community gardens out there.
That is something that I live for. I love to talk to other people about their community gardening experiences because everyone is so different. You can say that you were a part of a community garden in New Hampshire and then come to Durham, North Carolina, and the experience is very different. The people are different. What is offered is different. Just it, you will have that. You will still cultivate and have that same community element, but what jurisdiction or agency is administering the program really determines a lot of how people will use the space and how they will experience the space. So I'm very proud that and thankful that our budget allows for us to provide communal tools. Program offerings allow for us to provide compost and wood chips that are made in-house. We just have access to a lot of resources, which again, that's not how our program initially started, but we've just been trying to build something that will have a lot of longevity in the county and in this region.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great model for those who want to learn more about Montgomery County community gardening or community gardening in general. How would they contact you, Michelle?
So you all can, I'm pretty easy to find. I can be found on the parks website, which is montgomeryparks.org. You can also find me. Sometimes I'm on Instagram at n.mi.chelle. It's literally in my shell because sometimes I am in my shell. And so you can find me there, and you can always just find me typically in a community garden doing an inspection or talking it up with a gardener. So pretty easy to find.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And any final advice, say, for a place of worship, a business, a HOA, or condo association that's looking to start their own community garden?
Yes, do it. Just do it. People think that I don't want any other community gardens because they're not under parks. No, I want community gardens. I want spaces where people will feel comfortable. I love the idea of someone walking from their condo 2 feet to space that is typically mowed and then converted into a thriving and beautiful community garden space. It will help you save on mowing costs and all those other things that you're paying for if you just let people have some autonomy around the space and the land that's around them. Yeah, and the proposal thing, always start with a proposal, get those ideas at least on paper. And we when I say we, I mean myself and my assistant manager, Emma Morrell. She's amazing. We also just provide some consulting for if you're interested or don't know exactly where to go. You can always just reach out to us and we'll give you some insight or some feedback on your project.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Kathy. It's great to be on.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with you all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Plant profile, lavender. Lavender, Lavandula species, is a sub-shrub that is both beautiful and useful. From making soaps and perfumes to flavoring cocktails, lavender's benefits are many. That wonderful scent that we are familiar with resides in the flowers. Those same flowers are a huge attraction for all kinds of pollinators to visit your garden. That scent also makes them deer and rabbit resistant. Lavenders need full sun and good drainage. Picture them growing in their native Mediterranean region, and that will give you a clue as to where to place them. Specifically on a slope or edge of a rock wall. The usual cause of death for a lavender plant is that the roots rotted by being kept too wet over the wintertime. You can increase drainage by adding chicken grit or crushed oyster shells or gravel to the soil when planting it. There is no need to fertilize lavender, though if you can add a bit of lime to the soil, it will be happier. To keep them healthy, space the plants far enough apart for good air circulation and mulch around them with gravel to prevent infected soils from splattering onto the lower leaves. Lavender should be shaped up in early spring once they've leafed out. Cut just the dead tips off so you don't mistakenly go too far back into the woody parts of the stem. After they finish flowering, you can remove the wiry sticks that remain after the first blooms have faded to keep the plant tidy and to encourage a bit of reblooming later in the summer. Lavender generally thrives in USDA hardiness zones 5 through 9. English lavenders are the hardiest in our area, and the varieties Munstead and Hidcote are widely available. The Lavenden hybrids, Provence and Grosso, also do very well in the Mid-Atlantic. More recent introductions to try include Phenomenal and Sensational, bred by Lloyd Traven at Peachtree Farm in Kintersville, Pennsylvania. The best time to harvest lavender is when just a few of the buds on the stem have bloomed. Try to harvest early in the morning after the dew has dried. Allow the stems to dry by hanging them upside down, then remove the dried buds for use in sachets to place in a drawer or under a pillow for a good night's sleep. Lavender, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the flowers on my hibiscus plants, and over at the community garden plot, we're starting to pick our cucumbers finally. In garden tips that we shared this week on our social media, we talked mainly about edible gardening, including the tip that tomatoes and other edible fruits can get sun scald when their foliage is diseased, damaged, and leaves then exposed to the sun's intense summer rays. You can protect them by putting a cover cloth or shade cloth over the beds. In upcoming local gardening events, you might want to soothe your soul with an immersive evening of sound meditation, nature connection, and tea at twilight in the serene setting of Meadowlark Botanical Gardens in Vienna, Virginia. Paloma Jimenez-Reque and Ilana Rubin are inviting you to slow down, awaken your senses, and reconnect with the natural world on Friday, August 1st from 6:30 to 8:30. Registration is $65 per participant, and you can register online at novaparks.com. And then the next day, Saturday, August 2nd, there is a daylily sale at the McLean Nursery on Satter Hill Road in Parkville, Maryland. The sale starts at 11, but you want to get there a little bit early to check out the offerings and be prepared for the sale start. The next day, Sunday, August 3rd, the sale continues on at the Benson Hammond House on Aviation Boulevard in Linthicum Heights, Maryland. All sales are cash or check only. For more information about these daylily sales, go to MarylandFreeStateDaylily.com. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Food Gardening Network with the last word on growing sweet corn in small spaces by Amanda MacArthur. Last weekend at a friend's barbecue, they excitedly showed me their new plot for growing corn. My friend was so excited that I didn't notice until that very moment at the peak of the afternoon that her plot was very much shaded. Luckily, another friend chimed in so I didn't have to be the know-it-all this time. In her case, at least, she had plenty of room to grow a pretty big plot of corn if she really wanted to. Some people aren't so lucky, but it can be done. Listen, I get it. When you mention growing sweet corn in small spaces, most people give you the same look they'd reserve for someone claiming they're going to raise cattle in their studio apartment. But here's the thing. Conventional wisdom about corn needing endless acres is about as outdated as dial-up internet. Sweet corn in containers and tiny plots isn't just possible, it's actually superior in some ways to field growing. Here's your first corn fact. The moment you harvest sweet corn, enzymes immediately start converting those precious sugars into bland starch. We're talking about a vegetable that literally gets less delicious by the hour. Commercial corn can lose up to 40% of its sweetness within 6 hours of harvest. This is why corn enthusiasts, and yes, corn enthusiasts are absolutely a thing, will literally set timers around harvest time. They're not being dramatic, they're being scientifically accurate. When you grow your own, you control the harvest-to-table timeline. That grocery store corn that traveled hundreds of miles and sat on shelves for days, it's basically corn's tired, less interesting cousin. Now let's address the elephant in the garden. Corn is absolutely uncompromisingly obsessed with sunlight. We're talking 6 to 8 hours of direct sun minimum, with more being exponentially better. Stick corn in partial shade, and you're essentially asking a race car to run on cooking oil. Technically possible, but the results will be underwhelming at best and catastrophic at worst. Your mission? Find the absolute sunniest spot in your space. Yes, this might mean relocating your prized flower arrangements. Priorities, people. Now, can you do containers? Well, traditional field corn sends roots 6 feet deep and 3 feet wide. In containers, you're essentially asking your corn to live in a high-rise apartment instead of a sprawling ranch house. The amenities better be exceptional. Your container specifics? You want a minimum depth of 12 inches, although 16 to 18 inches is definitely better. You want the width to be as wide as possible for stability. And the volume sweet spot? Well, a 30-gallon container can support 9 to 12 plants. In drainage, critical corn likes consistent moisture but despises waterlogged roots, so make sure you have adequate drainage. Now we get into the physics problem. Corn grows tall and develops a relatively small root system compared to its height. This creates a tipping hazard in containers. Wider bases and heavier containers solve this engineering challenge. You will also be hand-pollinating anything in a container. While it's not impossible, consider it a science project. Speaking of pollination, unlike self-pollinating plants, corn requires wind-blown pollen to travel from tassels, male flowers, to silks, female flowers. Each silk connects to a potential kernel mispollinating one silk and you get a gap in your ear. You can use the block planting strategy. So instead of traditional rows, plant corn in tight blocks. A 4x4 foot block creates optimal conditions for pollen distribution. Think of it as engineering a microclimate for successful corn reproduction. Or you can use the hand pollination technique. In ultra-small spaces, wind might not be sufficient. Enter agricultural matchmaking in the form of manual hand pollination. This isn't just backup insurance. In small plots, hand pollination often produces more uniformly filled ears than wind pollination alone. So you have it. Growing sweet corn in small spaces requires more attention than field corn, but the payoff is extraordinary. Or at least it's fun. And maybe you'll have finger-sized ear of corn your first year, or maybe you'll have a whole batch. The next time someone tells you corn needs acres to grow properly, just smile and start planning your container corn empire. Science, strategy, and a little rebellious gardening spirit are all you need. This has been Christy Page with Food Gardening Network.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. Intern Miguel Zarate edited the interview with our expert guest. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to our episode 129, Sharing the Harvest, GardenDC episode 202, Documenting Gardens, and GardenDC episode 198, Rats and Other Destructive Critters. By the way, you can become a listener, supporter, and subscriber. Look for that link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a minute to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.